Good morning, everyone. I hope you have been having an informative and insightful conference part. I'm Kumar Jackson. I'm manager of origination and structuring at JSE Capital Markets. I'll be the moderator for the next session, and the topic, as we have already shared, is facilitating the mobilization of capital by effective legislation. Our speaker for this topic is Dr. Honorable Nigel Clark, Jamaica's Minister of Finance and Public Service, and Member of Parliament for St. Andrew Northwest. Dr. Clark is not only passionate about the topic, but also brings a unique perspective to the discussion, having had long and successful careers in both private and public sectors. Ladies and gentlemen, please make welcome our Minister of Finance.
Mr. Master of Ceremonies is Anthony Cook, Managing Director of the Jamaica Stock Exchange, Marlene Street Forest, Directors of the Stock Exchange, listed companies, those here in person at the Jamaica Stock Exchange Conference, and those online, good morning. It's fantastic to see that COVID or no COVID, the Jamaica Stock Exchange continues to put the capital markets front and center in Jamaica, and begins the year, has this coveted slot in the year to get all the news about the economy and about capital market developments into the public space with 12 months of the year to go. The last 24 months in Jamaica have been a case study, really, for why it is so critically important for Jamaica to maintain a disciplined focus as far as policy is concerned and continue to reform our economy. One of the things that it shows is that we have agency and that we can create the future that we want to see. We are not promised a sequence of events without obstacles. But what we do know is that if we pursue policy that is internally coherent and adheres to timeless principles, we will be able to absorb setbacks and shocks and bounce back quickly. And that's what it's all about. For the last 40 years, when we say Jamaica has had an average growth of 1%, what has bedeviled us is that we have had a frequent burst of starts and stops, where our periods of economic expansion have been much too few and followed far too frequently by periods of economic decline that are far too long. I.e., exactly what we have been able to do over the past 24 months is what has been absent over the past 40 years, which is to sustain your periods of expansion and your periods of contraction, which will inevitably come. They come, you absorb it, and you have the policy space to respond, and you bounce back. And through it all, you maintain the underlying stability of your economy. And remember, stability does not mean that there isn't individual problems. Doesn't mean that a company here, a company there, an individual here, individual there, or scores of individuals don't face hardships. But what stability means is that the policy focus of the government, the thrust, continues through the crisis. And that's indeed what has happened here in Jamaica. We made our central bank independent in the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic. And we were able to do that because despite the pandemic, we maintained the underlying stability of our economy. And thank God we did that. We have an independent central bank at the time of the greatest monetary challenge that we have seen in our lifetimes, which has been frequently reported on, and I don't plan to speak on here today. But we were able to do that and to continue what was a policy commitment, despite the fact that there was this massive contraction introduced or induced by the pandemic, because the stability of the economy was maintained. We had the policy space to respond to the pandemic. We would have created a national disaster fund in the 2 years prior and put away a couple $2 billion for use in periods of disaster. And in that first 2 months of the pandemic, before we could have a supplementary budget, it is from those funds that we are able to provide support to Jamaican people. We had privatized Trans-Jamaica Highway and Wigton. We had reintegrated PCJ into its parent ministry, extracted $6 billion from that, from the privatizations, PCJ, and other activities. We had, I see Gervais Warner in the room, and I hear him talking about his war chest. Our war chest wasn't as big as his, but, well, actually it was bigger. Because we entered that fiscal year with $73 billion of resources that we had planned to pay down the debt that was maturing in September of 2020. Okay? So what we were planning to do is that we were planning to reduce our debt to GDP by 3% of GDP in a one-off transaction. And over the period of 24 months before that, we were building up to that, carefully divesting entities and putting the cash aside. It was very painful to turn around and realize that the plans that we had for that had to be abandoned. But they say that preparation many times is better than good luck. But not only in the public sector were we able to continue and to absorb the shock. In the private sector as well, the fact that we have agency was a very encouraging thing to see. When we reduced transfer tax and abolished stamp duty, and it was accompanied by the record reduction in the policy rate was reduced 10 times between 2018 and the increase in August of 2021, 10 times at least. And we saw from that a surge in our construction sector that we have not seen in a very, very, very long period of time. In fact, it surpasses the previous surge that we had in the 91 or thereabouts, when we had a lot of buildings coming up in New Kingston. That was almost limited to New Kingston. But everywhere you drive across Jamaica, you see the buildings coming up. Apartment buildings, factory buildings, BPO buildings, commercial buildings. To the point that we have another problem, which is to make sure that our approval process and our permitting process is robust and protected from undue influence. So success, leads to another, you never stop scaling the mountain. You get to another area and you have to figure out more problems before you can go again. But the point to be made here is that throughout the pandemic, the construction sector grew every single quarter from the quarter of July to September of 2020, through the pandemic, through Delta, through Omicron, and continued to deliver for the Jamaican economy. And that was an incredible, and is an incredible thing to have seen unfold, but entirely predictable if the policies of the government are supportive of that kind of activity. And in difficult times in particular, it requires a level of fixity of purpose to be able to maintain stability and a coherent policy stance in the midst of economic shock and contraction. You will recall during several of those months, I used to collect the newspaper clip outs because every other week somebody was calling for some other initiative that would have seen the government give up resources. I don't know if you remember that, and it's still happening. But there was a period, there's a concentrated period where call for reducing here, reducing there, reducing here, reducing here. And in periods like that, you have to be pretty grounded in the principles of your policy framework to ensure that we can steer through the storm. So we're very proud of the fact that the Jamaican economy has bounced back quite with a degree of momentum from the depth of the pandemic, where we contracted by 10% in 2020. In the scheme of the Caribbean, 10% was not the worst. Their economy is far more exposed to tourism that it declined by much higher amounts. But our recovery stands out in the region, with the first quarter of 14%, followed by the second quarter of 5.8%, and what is forecasted at between 7 and 9% for the full fiscal year. Clearly, we are not back up to pre-COVID levels yet, but there's every indication that if things continuing as they are, we will attain pre-COVID levels of economic output in this upcoming fiscal year. And that, don't want to count chickens before they hatch, but let me just say this up front. If Jamaica is able to recover pre-COVID levels of economic output within this fiscal year, clearly it would be a record, but it would be also extremely good news for all Jamaicans. You'll recall that in previous crises, it has taken us 10 years and 14 years. And in this crisis, in countries in the Caribbean, let me put it to you, that there will be countries where it will take much, much, much longer to retain pre-COVID levels of economic output in those economies. So we need to celebrate what, for developed economies, is something that they take for granted, that they have an economic shock, and because of coherent policy, they recover quickly. And that is something that needs to become the norm for us in Jamaica. That is how we can improve standards of living over a long period of time, because Jamaica is vulnerable. We are vulnerable to a variety of economic shocks. And that is why economic resilience and resilience in policymaking is even more important for us. Now, one of the things about the economic recovery that is most pleasing is that it's an economic recovery that was accompanied with job recovery. We're not talking here about a single factory pumping out output and having economic recovery as a result. We're talking about an economic recovery where people regained their jobs. With almost 94,000 to be exact, 94,000 growth in jobs between July 2020 and July 2021. And jobs continued to grow. And in October, jobs were higher in October 2021 than July 2021 by several thousand. And if you compare October 2021 with October 2020, they were higher by 80,000. So jobs has continued to grow quarter by quarter, to the point that the unemployment rate for October is the lowest in the history of Jamaica. Now, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but an unemployment rate was 7.1% in October, with a labor participation rate that continues to grow. And the number of persons employed continues to grow. Now, that is very good news, because the social stability of the country is important for economic stability. Let me say it again. Social stability of the country is important for economic stability. Now, for that reason, I want us to remember that the structure of our economy is what it is. And some people we don't curse what we have. You use what you have to get to where you want to go. So the structure and the nature of our jobs today are what they are. But those who lost their jobs and have regained it, you go and talk to them. And you'll understand how grateful, pleased, and satisfied they are to be in a job versus to be out of a job. But the economic and social structure is what it is. And for that reason, when it comes to, I'm going to divert for a moment. I hope you'll forgive me. But when it comes to the setting of bank fees, it would seem as if our commercial banks are tone deaf. There seems to be a callous disregard for the economic circumstances of a plurality of Jamaicans. How else do you explain that the banks have introduced a fee of $25 in one instance and $30.85 in another instance to withdraw your money from an ATM that they have put in place? And if you use another bank to withdraw your money, it's $60. Before this round of increases, it was free. Now, I thought that the idea was to graduate customers from inside the banking hall to using the digital channels. Oh, you expect if you charge people to withdraw money, no, these problems in the make of more market investment for those who are huge dollars got paid.
In 2021, you tried saving towards your goals. So in 2022, try investing towards them. Investing in stocks in 2021 has provided our clients the growth needed to achieve their financial goals much faster than a traditional account. NCB Capital Markets makes investing easy with online investment tools and support from our Wealth Hub. With your NCB online access credentials, you can open your investment account online in less than 10 minutes using Go IPO. Go ahead, make the move, and make 2022 your best year yet.
Celebrate those jobs and we celebrate those Jamaicans, and we want them to feel comfortable and provided for in the Jamaica that we're building. Now, for us to sustain economic growth going forward, we are going to have to address the productivity of our economy. And productivity growth comes in two forms. One is the productivity of capital by making the dollar of capital invested more productive so it can yield more returns. You are able to expand your economy. And by making labor productive, where you can have more output for the same degrees of input, you enhance the economic growth of your country. For the former, we will continue to invest in the infrastructure of Jamaica, ensuring that commercial activities and enterprises can be organized and conducted at lower and lower costs as time goes on. And as far as labor productivity is concerned, we'll continue to invest in people, in health, and in education. But a big component of productivity lies with the public bureaucracy and with the public sector. And it's a complex problem that has many components. And one of the components is the way we are organized in the public sector and our ability to attract and retain qualified persons. So while we will continue to focus on economic recovery and maintaining a healthy population, addressing the security challenge, and restoring education, this year's budget will give disproportionate focus to the implementation of the restructuring of public sector compensation. The structure of public sector compensation in Jamaica today is chronically unsustainable. We are, for one, we're unable to attract and retain the professionals we need to run the public bureaucracy. And it has reached an acute level with areas of government that are critical to the functioning of the state as we build an even more elaborate state with independent central bank, independent fiscal commission, independent, etc., etc. What you need are qualified, exposed, highly trained individuals to run that bureaucracy. And with the current structure, we aren't able to attract and retain. We have vacancies in critical areas that can't be staffed. Our statin reports could come out much sooner if we had the qualified individuals in the right places. We have over 325 grade levels in the public sector and 185 allowances, making public sector compensation complex, making it inequitable, making it non-transparent, and fiscally risky. And we're not making sufficient use of technology in how we optimize the organization and operational efficiency of the public sector. And we have to address that. I'll be speaking much more fulsomely on it, but I want you to be aware. No, we must recognize that addressing these issues will lead to a rise in public sector compensation as a proportion of GDP. It is therefore absolutely critical that this restructuring, as necessary as it is not seen as and does not lead to a reversal of the fiscal and economic stability that we have achieved. That would be a colossal setback for everyone, including public sector employees. After years of sacrifice by every single Jamaican, we have to continue to be judicious in how we deploy public resources. So along with the implementation of the public sector restructuring, the compensation restructuring, the government will continue to pursue the transformation of the public sector and continue to improve, continue to implement strategies to improve the efficiency of the public sector, including merger, closure, and divestment of public bodies, and inclusive of outsourcing in areas where the public sector does not have to perform that function, as well as introducing technology to allow us to implement shared services where we can focus resources and over time bring our public sector wages to GDP ratio back into line over the medium term. Now, this will not be an easy undertaking. And as I say, the wage to GDP ratio is something that can't be ignored. But it's a path that we have to take, even as over the medium term, we bring it into line with the efficiency gains I've just described. Now, I say it to you here because you have a vested interest in an efficient public sector. You have a vested interest in Jamaica being more productive, and because that is the basis of our economic growth. And as we restructure public sector compensation, the expectations of the public sector will be elevated. And for one, what we intend to do is to move all public services that are feasible to be online, to move them all online, which improves the productivity of every single Jamaican. When you can be on a phone or on some other device and access public services in Jamaica. So what I want you to understand from this is that the government of Jamaica is prepared to take bold and ambitious steps to reform the Jamaican economy. That is what we have done, and that is what we continue to do. And the bold and ambitious reform that we will be undertaking this year is the implementation, or to begin the implementation of a restructuring of public sector compensation. We expect the growth in the economy to continue throughout this fiscal year, upcoming fiscal year, and the fiscal year after that. And we want you to, there's a big competition for capital in Jamaica, which is good, and the stock market plays a role in an intermediation role in the allocation of that capital, and I want to applaud the work that you've done in that area. And the good thing is that throughout the pandemic, we had IPOs. And APOs around the world. They had what? Lockdown. Lockdown here, lockdown here. One place that never locked down is the Jamaica Stock Exchange. And that is a testimony to the leadership of the stock exchange, the innovation of the stock exchange, but also the resilience of the Jamaican economy. And it augurs well for the future. Because the stock market and the activities here represent a leading indicator. So I now see that we have a big Trinidadian company, the biggest of them all, looking to cross-list in Jamaica. I want to say to them that Jamaica is not only a place to raise capital, Jamaica is a place to invest capital. So I am looking forward to seeing the investment that is going to follow in Jamaica from one of the largest companies in our region. And, you know, the Trinidadians move in packs. You remember the previous wave, right? So I expect when the alpha dog moves, I hope I can use that term, it's not derogatory. But when the alpha of them all moves in, I'm expecting others to follow, and we welcome them to invest in Jamaica because the returns in Jamaica will exceed the returns elsewhere. And what they have in Jamaica is stability of policy. What they have is policy that is geared towards the maximization of economic output and jobs. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Dr. Clark, we thank you very much for that very insightful and informative presentation. We're very pleased from your speech to note that Jamaica has been able to maintain stability throughout the pandemic due to the fixity of purpose that you have around maintaining economic stability. We also look forward to those bold and ambitious steps that the government will be taking to improve our economy. At this time, I want to invite you to remain on the podium because we're going to take some questions. And we invite members of the audience to, pose questions to the finance minister. For those that are online, we invite you to use the Q&A feature of the chat. And for those in the live audience, we invite you to use, there's a microphone here in the auditorium towards my right, towards your left. You can use that microphone in the meantime to ask your questions. The Minister of Finance, of course, has a lot to do. He has to return to running the country's affairs. So we ask that you keep the questions brief and to the point. And please also introduce yourself. Do we have any questions from the chat? Any questions from the auditorium? Do we? Oh, yes. Oh, somebody's saying they're not hearing anything in the chat. Do we have someone asking a question in the auditorium? I'm not seeing anyone. Well, Minister, I have a question for you. So we're on the topic of, policy ensuring and facilitating capital and mobilization. From your perspective, what are some of the gaps in terms of policy that you're seeing in order to move Jamaica forward to help us leapfrog in terms of mobilizing capital and inviting more companies like, Massey to come to our shores to invest?
Thank you for that question. Let's look at it from both points of view, demand and supply. On the demand front, one of the things that we are focused on doing is completing the reform to the pension framework in Jamaica that will attract far more persons to having a pension account. And it is through increasing the pool of institutional savings in the country that you'll have greater demand for opportunities for investment. And the area that we have remaining, you'll recall, no doubt, that just 2 years ago, we did a component of that reform, which was to permit pension funds to invest in venture capital and private equity and to invest in private debt. The second component, which is on the other side of the equation, will introduce mobility of pension funds. Today, we have a suboptimal situation that your only choice if you change jobs is really to get a deferred pension, which is not attractive if you're 35, right? Or to withdraw your contributions. And when you withdraw your contributions, you only get back your contributions. You don't get back your employer's contributions. And so the society, you are worse off, and the society as a whole is worse off. We plan to introduce legislation that will allow you to transfer your pension as you change your job. Now, what that will do is that will make it easier, not easier, it will make it more attractive for persons to save towards retirement. And there are other components of that reform that are geared towards making pension savings a more attractive option that will build a pool of investable capital in the country. On the supply side, I think that the stock exchange is doing an excellent job in attracting firms to list, and I believe that by making the economy more competitive, that is the biggest or the most impactful sort of policy thrust that the government can do to support, the stock exchange in attracting companies. Because if we are in a Jamaica where, capital, where competition is intense, then companies are going to want to make sure that they are optimally structured from a capital point of view. So we intend to and sometimes that comes with its own sort of friction, but we intend to continue to make moves to ensure that all sectors of the economy are competitive.
Okay, thank you very much for answering my question. I have a few questions from the chat. I'll start with this one from Andrea. She's asking, Minister, what is the expected time frame for completing the compensation restructuring exercise for public sector employees?
Right. So we're going to begin the implementation of the compensation restructuring with an effective date of April 1st. The implementation date will differ because we are going to need to complete a series of consultations with public sector employees, informing them, giving them, ensuring that the principles are understood. And also, we have to dialogue and conclude our consultations with bargaining groups and unions. So the implementation date will occur as soon as we can get those series of consultations out of the way, and I'll be devoting a lot, if not all of my time towards that in the first few weeks, first few months of the fiscal year. Now, in terms of how long it will take to complete the implementation, that is something I'd first want to dialogue and discuss with the bargaining groups and the unions, rather than to disclose that here in a forum, at the Jamaica Stock Exchange. But it should be obvious that it's not something that we can do in one fiscal year. It would not be fiscally achievable to do that. But in the first fiscal year, there would be a significant amount of the implementation will happen in the first year, but not all.
Okay, noted. I have another question in the chat from Javon Clark. Javon is saying, in relation to the divestment of public assets, I believe it's a great move by the GOJ. However, how will the mass of people be factored into the divestment?
Well, as you've seen from the divestments we've done so far, we have had a cascading approach where small investors are guaranteed their allotment. So it's not an allotment that is, pro rata from the get-go. We have had divestments where applications up to a certain minimum amount are filled in full before any other applications are considered. And that has allowed us to have broad-based distribution and to broaden the ownership base of the Jamaican economy through this divestment exercise. I believe that we had 30,000 successful applicants who became shareholders in both divestments that we did in recent times, and we'll continue to implement such measures. And we also had reserved shares for public sector workers and employees as well. So we're making efforts to broaden the base of the Jamaican economy and to include as many people as possible.
Right. Thanks for that response, Dr. Clark. There's another question. I'm getting most of the questions from the chat, apparently, from Vanessa Williams. She's asking, can you say what will be the key development areas that Jamaica will be pursuing for 2022?
Thank you for that question, Vanessa. So one of the key policy reforms I mentioned is a bold and ambitious restructuring of public sector compensation. I want you to understand that the structure of compensation has become more anachronistic year after year, decade after decade, and we have not had a wholesale restructuring of it in, I don't know when, 5 decades. So this is a monumental policy shift, policy that the government of Jamaica is implementing and that we've been working on for a few years. We will, in 2022, we will need to continue to focus on managing the pandemic with the health measures that the Ministry of Health is responsible for, and also to ensure that the education of our students is optimized. And of course, security will be a major focus and concern for 2022. So those, I would say, are major sort of policy focuses. But we also intend, I should say to them, wait until the budget speech, but we also intend to, from an investor point of view, we are looking at bringing the Large Scale and Pioneer Industry Act to Parliament, which will facilitate investments that are over $1 billion in size. Jamaica's done a good job. Investment of $200 million to build a hotel is no longer doesn't make the headlines anymore. We have a long pipeline of such investments. Where we want to go now we want to be able to attract investments of more than $1 billion US. And that's why I'm happy that Mr. Warner is in the room. And we will be making special provisions through legislation to be passed in Parliament or to be tabled in Parliament in the upcoming fiscal year to attract large-scale and pioneer investments in Jamaica of a size greater than $1 billion US.
Okay, thank you. And I'm told that we can only take one more question. So the question I have here is from Shanika Wallace-Graham. She's asking what strategies will be implemented for the youth and the average Georgian to understand what has been said here. How does the government plan to make their plans more understandable?
Thank you for that question. Financial literacy is a policy focus of the government of Jamaica. The Citizens Guide to the Budget, for example, is a policy initiative in that direction, where over the past 3 years, we've produced a very simple guide to the budget that goes out in national newspapers, that's comprehensible to all Jamaicans. We have also made steps to deepen the openness and transparency of Jamaica's policies and finances. Just last year, we implemented an initiative where all capital investments in Jamaica are searchable on a website, the Ministry of Finance, where you can log in and you can see the suite of capital investments. You can search by parish, by ministry, by sector. You can get an update on how much has been spent so far, how much more is to be spent. You can see completion dates, you can see delays, and very critically, you can upload your own photographs of that particular project, make comments and suggestions. So the government is moving closer to the citizen by being more open and transparent in the way we go about the business of government with a view to increasing the understanding of government policy by the citizenry and improving financial and economic literacy.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Clark. On behalf of the organizers and guests here at the conference, we thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule of running the country's financial affairs to be here with us to share your perspective. Your thoughts and so on were well received, and we wish you all the best as you continue to serve.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Lovely session there, Tamara. Thank you very much for that. Very smoothly facilitated. And of course, I like the two words there, financial literacy. Financial literacy. Very key to cutting through all the maze here.
In 2021, you tried saving towards your goals. So in 2022, try investing towards them. Investing in stocks in 2021 has provided our clients the growth needed to achieve their financial goals much faster than a traditional account. NCB Capital Markets makes investing easy with online investment tools and support from our Wealth Hub. With your NCB online access credentials, you can open your investment account online in less than 10 minutes using Go IPO. Go ahead, make the move and make 2022 your best year yet.